was a container full of dead babies. And
Whoa.
in 1982 in California, there was this doctor and he had a shipping container in his backyard. And I'm not sure if he was like making payments to pay it off. So he failed to make payments. Check didn't go through. Somebody went to go repo it. So they took the container and stuff. And first of all, it was mad fucking heavy. It was hard for them to put it on the truck. So hard that they couldn't take it off the truck.
Damn, what the
That's
fuck?
how heavy it was. Yeah. So it was so heavy that they had to open it and basically unload it one by one. As soon as they opened it, one of the workers ended up getting hit by something, and it was a dead baby.
What the fuck?
As soon as that happened, they ended up calling the supervisor. Supervisor comes, they ended up seeing that in these cardboard boxes were a lot of plastic containers containing dead fetuses and dead babies. Exactly over 16,500
babies.
dead babies were in there, bro. The authorities would call. Basically what that was part of an abortion clinic. Imagine seeing that, bro. Your fucking regular day at work.
I would get traumatized.
But people were saying that back then was when the news actually showed
fucked up shit.
So
this shit was on the news.
It was covered on the news, yeah.
What the fuck?
I'm gonna show you the videos now of like the people getting interviewed, like the workers and shit.
I got a radio call from Ron Gillette. He said the men were throwing up and there was something really wrong.
One of them fell down and hit me right in front of my feet. It was opened up, and there it was. It was a mutilated.
The man seen stabbing that security camera was 29-year-old Waldo Mejia. Now, the neighbors who noticed this disturbing footage actually called the police on Waldo at the time and he was arrested. But just a few months later, on January 5th of this year, Waldo attacked a 14-year-old boy who was walking to school. The 14-year-old named Caleb Rios was randomly targeted. There is no prior motive to this attack, and it's still unknown what caused Waldo to snap. But Waldo approached Caleb from behind and began stabbing. And unfortunately, Caleb, the 14-year-old victim, would die from his injuries. Now, this story is disturbing because Waldo had been arrested multiple times in the past, 4 times prior to this murder, including on other stabbing-related charges. Not only had he stabbed his neighbor's Ring video camera, but he had also stabbed somebody in another completely unprovoked attack in New York City. After he was arrested, Waldo was seen screaming expletives at reporters and the authorities, and still there has been no explanation as to why he targeted this random 14-year-old kid on his way to school. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
After holding in her pee for 3 hours to win a Wii gaming system, this woman tragically lost her life. You see, Jennifer Strange was participating in a bizarre radio contest called Hold Your Wii for a Wii. The challenge? Contestants had to drink water every 15 minutes without using the bathroom, competing for a Nintendo Wii gaming system. Jennifer consumed nearly 2 gallons of water during the contest. Witnesses even remarked that her stomach appeared bloated, almost like she was pregnant due to the excessive amount of water. Despite her efforts, Jennifer finished in second place, winning only a pair of concert tickets. After the contest, she went home feeling unwell and even called into work sick. Just 2 hours later, Jennifer was found dead in her bathroom. The cause of death was water intoxication, a rare but fatal condition where excessive water dilutes sodium levels in the body, causing swelling in the brain. This incident led to widespread criticism of the radio station for not ensuring the participants' safety and for ignoring warning calls from listeners during the broadcast who noted the dangers of such a contest. Several employees were fired, and Jennifer's family was awarded $16.5 million in a wrongful death lawsuit.
You obviously know what Benadryl is, right? So back in like 2020, there was a where you have to take a certain amount, like a dozen or more, to hallucinate. I don't recommend anybody to like obviously go do it. I'm not saying to go do it, but I'm just saying like people that would hallucinate on Benadryl, it would be bad trips overall. Like they would see spiders, they would see snakes, wasps attacking them. They would hear like familiar voices and unfamiliar voices talking to them, and they would see shadowy figures, and they will also see the Hat Man. Have you ever heard about the Hat Man?
The Hat Man, no.
It's a sleep paralysis demon. So people around the world has seen this mother for like years, bro. Websites dedicated to this, like people talking about their stories, stuff like that. Everybody would describe them the same way too, like a tall 6 to 8 foot
shit,
person.
bro, 6
he
to 8
wears a
foot.
fedora. You can't really see his face, only like 2 red eyes, and it's always like he's a shadowy figure.
And I remember a supporter actually talking about how they had sleep paralysis and they saw,
saw
a man with a hat outside of the window, bro. And keep in mind the window is like mad fucking tall.
So I do remember seeing a story about a therapist who had like a patient, and he would always say that he would.
This Loki made me even more scared because he was just talking about like a shadow person holding up the fucking car.
There was a famous author named David, and he wrote multiple best-selling horror novels. He was praised for plot twists and surprise endings. He received large amounts of fan mail every single day, and many other authors sent him manuscripts in hopes that they would get their work published. But David took pleasure in stealing the ideas from amateur writers. If he came across a manuscript with a great idea for a story, he would use it in his own books and deny the author any credit. One day, David got a manuscript, and as he read the first chapter, he felt he knew how it was going to end. He continued reading, and as he got to the last chapter, he noticed the pages were stuck together. And, anxious to finish the story, he pulled the pages apart. David felt increasingly tired, but still wanted to finish the story. When David finished, the ending was exactly what he thought. He then made a mental note to steal the story. But suddenly, David noticed a note from the author saying this: "I knew you were going to steal this story. You did it to me before and blacklisted me from the whole industry and ruined my career and life. And now I'm going to get my revenge." You had to pull the pages apart to read, didn't you? Are you feeling tired? That's normal. It's one of the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Soon your heartbeat will get slower and slower until it stops forever. Goodbye, David. Some twist endings can be very hard to predict.
This pedophile who participated in the events of January 6th might get away with his crimes against children. Listen, I know that this is a hot-button political issue, but please, no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, stick with me here. Because this guy might get away with the possession, distribution, and manufacturing of CP, or child pornography. So this is David Daniel, a man who was there on January 6th, actively participating in the events of that day. Here's a picture of him from that afternoon. So at one point, the FBI was looking into David Daniel based on assault and trespassing charges they wanted to file. And so in November of 2023, they executed a search warrant on his home. And what they found inside of his home is unbelievably disturbing. Obviously, investigators took a look at his iPhone and other electronic devices. And on David's electronic devices, they discovered videos and photographs of him raping 2 young girls in completely different cases that happened in different counties. One of the minors that had already accused him of this was under the age of 12 years old. Apparently, from 2015 to 2019, he had groomed this girl. He had forced her to allow him to take photographs and videos of her when she was nude, and he forced her to shower with him and do other things that I can't talk about here. So on September 20th of last year, he was rearrested on possession of CP and sexual exploitation of a minor charges. However, because of this pardon that he recently received, his legal team could now argue that that search warrant wasn't justified, and this could cause all of these charges to be thrown out of the window. I mean, the public needs to know about this stuff. Here's a guy who's responsible for the rape of 2 minors, one under the age of 12 years old, the other's age is unknown. And this took place over a period of 4+ years, where he groomed these girls, he forced them to pose for nude photographs, he made them shower with him, and he did so many other things to these girls that I can't talk about here. And because of that pardon, because of what that means for this legal case, the lawyers for this guy could literally ask for that search warrant to be nullified. I don't know what the proper terminology is, but they could essentially get all that stuff thrown out of the window because the investigators wouldn't have found the CP on his electronic devices if they hadn't executed that search warrant. So, like I said, no matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on, this should disgust you because there's no way that this guy should be walking free. I have no sympathy and no empathy for child predators, especially a guy like this who's a repeat offender, a serial offender, who victimized children over a period of years. And this is just dangerous stuff. No matter what you think of his actions and the events of that day, nobody should justify what this guy did and argue that his charges should be dropped.
She thought she'd met an 18-year-old guy online. She'd actually been groomed and was about to be lured to her death. It was 2007 and 15-year-old Carly Ryan was living with her mum in Stirling, Australia. Carly was hilarious. She was really energetic and she was the entertainer of her family. For 18 months, Carly had been talking to who she thought was her dream guy online on MySpace. Now, this dream guy was apparently 18-year-old Brandon Kane, who was a musician, and Carly thought he was gorgeous. He was apparently from Texas, but was living in Melbourne. Carly really felt she'd hit the jackpot with this guy. They had the same music taste, and they really seemed to have matching personalities. They got on so well. They often spoke on the phone well into the night. In January 2007, Brandon rang Carly up and said he'd love to see her on her birthday, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. But he had a suggestion. He said how about his dad Shane came on his behalf, as he was kind of driving through for work anyway, and he could bring her some gifts off Brandon. Now this was a little bit odd, but obviously Carly really desperately wanted these gifts, and she kind of wanted to just feel connected to Brandon in any way that she could. So if that was through his dad, then so be it. She spoke to her mum about this, and her mum asked to speak to this guy on the phone and see what the deal was. So she eventually spoke with him and organised for the dad to drop these gifts off. On the 26th of January, Shane showed up at the family home, and he was really very friendly with everybody and was really charming. However, as the evening went on, he was weirdly kind of a bit obsessive over Carly and very clingy with her. Things got weirder when later on it was revealed that the present he'd given Carly from Brandon was lingerie and a nurse's outfit. He announced to the family at the end of the day that he would go and find a hotel to stay in, but Carly's mum felt a bit bad and said, well, you can just stay here in the spare room. However, the following day, Carly's mum expressed concerns. She'd noticed Shane was just behaving really odd and seemed weirdly, like I said, possessive over Carly, and the final straw was when she walked past Carly's bedroom, saw Carly sleeping in the bed and Shane on top of the bed next to her. She told Shane to leave, which he did, but things would get much, much worse. Despite Carly's mum literally threatening to call the police on Shane and stop Carly using the internet, Carly continued to talk to Brandon online. A month went by, and on the 19th of February, Carly told her mum she was off to a sleepover at her friend's house. They hugged goodbye, and it would be the last time Carly's mum would ever see her. Little did she know, Carly was off to meet Brandon. She'd been convinced to meet with him at a secluded beach in Port Elliot. When Carly failed to return home the following day, her mum was frantic. She tried to contact Carly and couldn't get hold of her. She then received a strange phone call off a member of the public saying that they'd found her bag at the side of the road. She contacted police, but tragically it was too late. A heartbreaking call had come into officers that a young female had been found deceased, face down in shallow water. The autopsy revealed she'd been attacked, suffocated and drowned. There had also clearly been a struggle. The crime scene was littered with broken jewellery that had seemingly snapped off Carly's body. Police decided to look at local CCTV footage to see if there were any clues as to who Carly was with that evening. Luckily, they did find some footage of her walking, and she was with 2 males. A witness also reported seeing a car near the beach around that time and gave police a description. Carly's mum actually told officers about the weird situation with Brandon and his dad Shane and showed them some aggressive emails she'd received off Shane. They knew that this Shane character could potentially be responsible. Police managed to track some phone numbers that had been in contact with Carly and tracked them to a caravan park nearby. They found the car that eyewitnesses had described to police. And they discovered who was staying there and who the car belonged to, and they were stunned. It wasn't Shane or even his son Brandon. They didn't exist. The culprit was 48-year-old, father of 3, Gary Francis Newman. When they arrested him, they found notebooks full of usernames and passwords of aliases that he used online. On his computer were hundreds and hundreds of chats with underage girls. So who was the other person in the CCTV footage with Gary? It turned out it was Gary's 17-year-old son. Had he been made to pose as Brandon? His son was arrested, and Gary denied any wrongdoing. Now, the evidence showed that Gary had viciously attacked Carly, but detectives couldn't confirm whether the son had witnessed it or been involved in some way. Sand from the beach was found in the son's shoes. Gary was eventually given life in prison, but his son was cleared of all of the charges. The son's identity has never been revealed. This love triangle turned deadly, and the Dr. Phil show helped to solve the murder. It was January 2011 in Virginia. Bethany Decker was a student at the George Mason University in Fairfax. Now, she was super hardworking. She not only studied really hard, but she also worked part-time to earn some money. She'd married a man called Emil Decker back in 2009. Now, he worked in the army, and very shortly after, she gave birth to his son. Things obviously moved really quickly between the pair, but they seemed to be absolutely infatuated with each other and seemed to be a really good match. The only thing that seemed to kind of get in the way of their relationship was Emil's job in the army. He had to spend a lot of time away from home and away from his family, and Bethany ended up feeling quite isolated, left alone just with her and her son. The pair decided to go on a brief bit of a break and separate for a bit, but not actually divorce. They both needed to kind of have a think about what they really wanted. While she was working at an Italian restaurant, she ended up meeting another man. This was Ronald Roldan. The pair began spending more and more time together and eventually ended up in a full-blown affair. Now, as with her previous relationship, this one with Ronald moved very quickly too. He moved in with her and he became very controlling. He would demand that she tell him everything she was doing at every second of the day. It's believed he was even physically violent, and there were rumours that her son was seen with a black eye. Bethany actually was still in contact with Emil because they did share their son together and they were still technically married. She ended up confiding in him about what was going on in her relationship with Ronald. Emil was deeply concerned about her and he really wanted the pair to get back together. She agreed she kind of wanted to be with Emil at this point, and she was getting more and more scared of Ronald. However, there was a slight spanner in the works. She was pregnant with Ronald's child. At this point, Emil and Bethany decided to go away to Hawaii together. They needed a bit of a break. They needed some time, just the two of them, to try and rekindle their relationship. They returned back home on the 28th of January, and then the following day spent some time at Bethany's grandparents' house. They had a chat and kind of told the family that they were thinking of getting back together. But that night, Bethany got a call from Ronald. She seemed anxious and scared about what would happen if she didn't go and see him straight away. That would be the last time that Emil and Bethany's family would ever see her again. Bethany failed to turn up to any of her classes at uni after this, which was incredibly out of character. She also failed to show up to her job, which Emil found out after ringing them up because he was so concerned. However, people did think that they were hearing off Bethany. Several friends and Bethany's mum were getting kind of odd messages off her. They were spelt really badly and they were way too formal. Weeks went by and Emil had actually been deployed to Afghanistan by this point, so he couldn't actually go and physically look for her, but he remained really concerned. Her grandparents ended up turning up to her apartment and knocking on the door, trying to see if she was there, but there was no reply. They did notice something very suspicious, however. Her car was in the driveway, parked really strangely, and she had a flat tire. She usually took really good care of her car, so this didn't seem to add up. Her family reported her missing to police and Emil flew home immediately. He cooperated with police. Ronald, though, was very distant. He moved out of Bethany's apartment and couldn't seem to keep his story straight. He did, however, say to police that he didn't know where Bethany was and that the pair had broke up. Now, Bethany was a mother and she was 5 months pregnant at this point, so it just didn't make sense that she would run away sort of her own accord. This was backed up by the fact that her bank cards were traced and there was no activity on them whatsoever from the day that she vanished. It really wasn't looking good, but sadly, officers just couldn't find any evidence as to what might have happened to her. That was until November 2014. On the 14th of the month, police got a frantic phone call. It was from a woman called Vicky Willoughby. She told the dispatcher that she'd had to shoot her boyfriend in self-defense. He had snuck up behind her and started beating her viciously, so she'd grabbed a gun and shot at him, and he'd grabbed the gun back off her and shot her too. Thankfully, Vicky escaped and survived the attack, although she did lose an eye. The boyfriend in question was none other than Ronald Roldan. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder, but shockingly only got 6 years behind bars for this. In March 2015, Vicky went on the Dr. Phil show to speak out about Ronald and also about missing Bethany. She ended up linking up with Bethany's mum and telling the world on TV that Ronald and her had spoken about Bethany and he never denied murdering her. The added media attention brought more disturbing details to light. Ronald had also been arrested for assaulting another previous ex, smashing a woman's car window, along with identity theft. Finally, police searched Ronald's devices and they examined IP addresses and found that the messages that Bethany's friends and family received of so-called Bethany were probably more likely off Ronald. He was charged with second-degree murder and finally did plead guilty as part of a plea deal. The deal was he had to reveal what happened, and just bear in mind the fact that this is just his account of what happened. He told officers the pair had argued and he pushed her back and she accidentally hit her head. He then put her body in a bag and threw her in the waste disposal by their apartment. He was sentenced to just 12.5 years in prison plus 27 years suspended sentence. Bethany's family were never able to give Bethany a proper burial.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know what a volcanic eruption looks like, and how terrifying and devastating they could be. But have you ever seen the top view of a volcano erupting? Well, if not, I'm about to show you what it looks like right now, and it literally looks like hell coming up to Earth. Here's the video. So that's the top view of a volcanic eruption. Isn't it actually amazing that we can see this? Like in time periods long ago, a few people will be able to witness stuff like this, because most of them will be dead from seeing it. Let's just hope we never have to go through a catastrophic volcanic eruption, because this video might have just unlocked a new fear of volcanoes for me.
This woman killed her daughter by feeding her Mountain Dew. Tamara Brooks is a 41-year-old woman from Ohio. In January 2022, her 4-year-old daughter tragically passed away. Tamara and her partner reportedly found their daughter unresponsive on the 21st of January. They rang an ambulance and the child was raced to hospital. She sadly didn't make it. When she was examined post-mortem, it was discovered that she died from severe malnutrition and suffered diabetes-related complications. She had been fed Mountain Dew through a baby bottle, and the child's teeth were actually rotting so badly that she barely had any teeth left. The child had never been taken to a dentist, and Tamara was said to have mixed baby formula with fizzy drinks. Tamara pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and has been sentenced to 9 years in prison. The child's dad, Christopher Hobe, has also been charged with his daughter's death. He will be sentenced next month. Horrifically, this is not Tamara's only child, and certainly not the only child to have suffered in her care. Her son fell into a coma when he was 4 years old from undiagnosed diabetes. Tamara then failed to take him to follow-up appointments with doctors. This is the disgusting cage that a woman kept her son captive in until a chance encounter saved his life. There was a horrifying discovery made this year in a New York property that potentially saved the life of a 2-year-old boy. 24-year-old Naisha Lumpkin was living in Buffalo, New York, when a search warrant was executed on her home. This took place on the 8th of February. Now, the warrant was actually relating to an unrelated charge, but it's an absolute miracle that this happened. Police showed up, and thank God they found what they did. The woman's 2-year-old son was living in this makeshift cage. He had no room to stand up and barely any room to move. The tiny cage was made out of a playpen that was covered by a piece of crib tied down on 3 sides to the top. Inside was rubbish, animal bones, and human feces. Heartbreakingly, the child was said to have been covered in his own feces and urine and had bruises all over his body. His mother is alleged to have given excuses as to why she had, in inverted commas, to keep the child in the cage. Obviously, officers noted that there was absolutely no way that there was any excuse for the child to be kept in such deplorable conditions. Child Protective Services were called and the child was transported to a children's hospital. He was actually found to have 2 fractured ribs. Now, these were healing, which indicated that the injuries happened around 2 weeks prior. The mother was arrested on child endangerment charges. She is scheduled to appear in court next month.
If you look for the iceberg of the most disturbing films, this is definitely on there, bro. Megan is missing.
And you've watched this specific movie.
Not all the way. As soon as it turned into the point of view of the kidnapper, I couldn't watch it no more, bro. This is like a found footage type of film. From Megan's point of view to the friend's point of view. They're 14-year-olds. They're like best friends. Megan decides to try and help Amy by taking her to one of the parties that she goes to. They're doing drugs, getting drunk and in one of the scenes, you also see Megan doing a sexual act for Already right off the bat, this movie gives off this weird vibe. One of the people in the party ends up giving Megan a contact to some guy named Josh. The only way that she contacts him is through Skype.
This already sounds sus, bro.
Josh is saying, oh, he's 17. His camera's always turned off. She doesn't know what Josh looks like, only his voice. It gets to a point where they obviously get close enough, and Josh is like, yo, we should meet up. I'm shy, so we should do it in a place where it's just us.
Oh my gosh.
Let's meet up behind his diner. The next scene in the film is surveillance footage, her being taken by some unknown guy. So Amy decides to personally try to investigate where the fuck she could be. The next scene is she's recording herself under a bridge. She sets it down, and then you see a man behind her, and then that's the last time they see Amy. So now Amy and Megan are missing.
What the?
And I forgot to mention that in one of the scenes in the movie, there was these pictures of Megan that were surfacing on these fetish websites of her in bondage. This is why Amy decided to go on her own investigation. And those pictures, the director himself said that he was inspired
By a real life case?
by pictures that he's seen on the dark web of a girl.
These are videos you need to see before you die. Okay, so we all know how we have color TV, but it wasn't always like that. Before we had color TV, it was just black and white. But the video I'm about to show you shows the country Norway changing to color television live in 1972. Just imagine being alive in 1972 and experiencing this for the first time. This video is crazy, and here it is. So yeah, that's what changing to color live on television looked like in 1972.
Did this woman chop her husband up and dump him in a suitcase? Melanie Maguire married Bill in 1999. They had 2 sons together, and from the outside it looked like they had a really good relationship. However, behind closed doors things were not good. Melanie claimed that Bill had a gambling problem and a temper. One night in 2004, Melanie claims that Bill pushed her against a wall in an argument and hit her. She then stated that he tried to choke her. The next day, Bill was missing. Melanie contacted a divorce attorney and also filed for a restraining order. On May the 5th, 2004, some fishermen discovered a suitcase in Chesapeake Bay. Inside, they made a horrific discovery. Inside was a man's dismembered legs. Over the next week or 2, more suitcases were found. These contained a torso, a head, thighs, and a pelvis. It was found that the person had been shot to death. When the man was identified as Bill Maguire, Melanie said that she burst into tears. Interestingly, police found that Melanie had bought a gun 2 days before Bill's disappearance. They also found out she was having an affair. Police then discovered Bill's vehicle in Atlantic City. Melanie claims that she'd moved the vehicle as a prank. She said that he was out at a casino and she was sick of him gambling, so she moved the car. However, police found on Melanie's computer that she'd Googled how to purchase guns illegally. She also searched how to commit murder and undetectable poisons. Rubbish bags in her house also matched the rubbish bags that Bill was wrapped in. Melanie was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but she maintained she was not the killer. She suggested that her husband may have been killed over gambling debts. She claims that Bill had told her to buy a gun to protect herself.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know how spiders make webs and how amazing they look, but have you ever seen a spider actually make a web? If not, I'm about to show you a video of a spider making a web, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. These things are amazing, and here's the video.
This mother from Ohio has been arrested for the death of her 4-year-old daughter. Apparently, she caused her 4-year-old daughter to get diabetes because she fed her formula mixed with Mountain Dew. The diabetes in such a young child led to a brain injury. Now, Tamara Banks, the mother, will face at least 9 years in prison. But this is not the first time she's done this, apparently. Apparently, she had a son that fell into a coma because of the same thing. The girl also had a medical condition that was very obvious. She turned blue, and the mother didn't even call 911 until she turned very, very blue. Also, a 4-year-old should not still be drinking formula. She was supposed to be weaned off of it. The fact she was still doing this and mixing it with Mountain Dew, like, come on. By the time of autopsy and medical examination, they found that she had been brain dead. On top of that, all of her teeth were rotten from all of the sugary Mountain Dew. This is straight up neglect on her daughter that just passed and her son that ended up dead because of the same thing years ago. She claims she didn't know any better, but she was making refills on her prescriptions, going to regular doctor's appointments, so she definitely knew better. She probably just didn't want the kids to go to a doctor. I feel like for a case like this though, 9 years seems kind of light. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
This is one of the scariest catfishing cases I've ever heard of, and if you have kids that are online, you should listen to this. This is Austin Lee Edwards, a Virginia cop who catfished a 15-year-old girl online before murdering her family and abducting her. Austin posed online as a 17-year-old boy and was trying to sexually extort the 15-year-old girl. But once he asked for a nude photo of her, she stopped all communication with him. On November 25th, Austin drove from Virginia where he lived to the girl's home in Riverside, California, and murdered her mom and grandparents before setting the house on fire. He then kidnapped the girl. While trying to flee, Austin died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Thankfully, the girl was found physically uninjured, but the trauma she now has to face is horrendous. What's absolutely crazy to me is that prior to this, Austin was a cop with the Virginia State Police. Upon being hired there, he disclosed in his application that in 2016, he voluntarily checked himself into a mental health facility to receive treatment. And without looking into it at all, the Virginia State Police hired him anyway. But what they didn't know was that Austin was completely lying to them. It wasn't voluntary at all. In fact, in 2016, he was actually detained by police under an emergency custody order after threatening to kill himself and his dad. The VSP has since stated that they were not aware of this, but if they were, they would not have hired him. To top it off, Austin had quit the VSP in late October, and right before the murders, he was hired as a deputy with the Washington County Sheriff's Office. And according to them, they contacted the VSP during Austin's hiring process, and they mentioned none of that. Both departments have since stated that there was no indication that Austin would do this. There were so many opportunities for this to possibly have been stopped, but it wasn't. So please be careful and remember this story if you have kids that are online. You just really never know.
Reports of a mysterious bearded man plagued a community after a schoolgirl vanished. When the truth was revealed, it was more horrific than the locals could ever have imagined. It was the 18th of November, 1993. Angie Hasman was in 4th grade, living in St. Louis in Missouri. It should have been a normal afternoon as Angie made her way off the school bus back home. Unfortunately, it was the last journey she would ever take. She vanished off the school bus just 8 houses away from her home. Tragically, her body was then discovered 9 days later by a deer hunter. Horrifically, she'd been tied to a tree alive and left there to die. Her autopsy, though, revealed something even more hideous. Experts revealed she'd been kept alive for an entire week and endured torture and before actually passing away. Now, forensic experts collected evidence from the crime scene. This was things such as a fingerprint on the duct tape left on Angie's body. They also collected a DNA profile from her underwear. Now, eyewitnesses reported seeing a mysterious bearded man around the area just prior to her disappearance. However, searches for the mystery bearded man proved fruitless. The case went frustratingly cold until 25 years later. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, in March 2019, a lab tested the DNA found in the case. They uploaded the profile to a national database, and this time they got a match. The culprit was 61-year-old Earl Webster Cox. He was local to the area at the time of Angie's disappearance and murder. Interestingly, he'd actually previously been dishonorably discharged from the Air Force due to S activity with 4 different children. He'd only had to spend 8 years in prison before he was released. He then moved to Missouri and was again arrested for child abuse in 1992. He also pleaded guilty in 2003 for trying to entice a child over state lines for S activity. He also pleaded guilty to having over 45,000 images of child SA on his computer. How this man was free to then SA and kill Angie is absolutely mind-boggling. After his DNA was found on Angie's underwear, he was charged with murder, kidnapping and sodomy. He pleaded guilty and was given life in prison.
Former Major League Baseball player Austin Dean Maddox resisted arrest until our canine got involved.
The pedophile that you just saw being arrested in that video is former Major League Baseball Red Sox pitcher Austin Maddox. What a fall from grace this guy has had. So Austin was actually only playing as pitcher with the Red Sox for a few months before he was taken out of the game due to shoulder injuries. But needless to say, people know who this guy is. April 28th of this year, Austin began chatting with an undercover. He believed that this undercover agent was an underage girl. The girl then told Austin that she was only 14 years old. He said that's great, and he then moved forward to make plans so that the two could get physical. Shockingly, Austin actually went to the girl's house, intending fully to meet up with her. And obviously, if there would have been a real child there, Austin then probably would have sexually assaulted them. But instead of a minor, Austin was met at the door by various members of different federal agencies. And he was then charged with 4 felony counts, and he has a $300,000 bond. And I also forgot to mention, he tried resisting the officers when they attempted to place him under arrest. Now, sadly, we know what would have happened if the police weren't there and it was instead a child. We know what this guy was thinking, what this guy is into now. But we also know that in America, these types of crimes aren't really treated as seriously as they should be. And at maximum, he'll get 2 years, 1 year in prison. And at minimum, he might not even go to prison for any time at all. It's safe to say, though, that his professional sports career is over. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available now on all streaming platforms.
The man who played Troy McClure in The Simpsons was brutally murdered, and no one believed it until they got proof. Phil Hartman had a distinctive voice. He was well known for playing numerous Simpsons characters, such as Troy McClure, Lionel Hutz, and the man who was selling the monorail. He played loads of characters on show SNL and had roles in numerous films. He married his first wife, Gretchen Lewis, in 1970, and the pair got divorced just 2 years after. He then married again to Lisa Strain in 1982. He then again got divorced. In 1987, he married his third wife, former model Bryn Omdahl. They'd met on a blind date and he was infatuated with her. The pair had 2 children together, but the marriage had its challenges. Bryn was jealous of Phil's success and also extremely jealous of his exes. She once sent a very threatening letter to his ex-wife saying that she would rip her eyes out. She started drinking heavily and using substances, and although she had dreams of becoming an actress, she just couldn't live up to Phil's success. She ended up going to rehab several times. She would often have violent outbursts, and Phil was quite often terrified for the safety of his children. Now, interestingly, Phil actually became close friends with Joe Rogan, who did try and convince him to get a divorce. Unfortunately, though, he stuck with his wife, which proved to be fatal. On the 28th of May 1998, Bryn went to a restaurant to have drinks with a producer and a writer. After she got home, her and Phil had a heated argument before going to bed. Before 3 a.m, Bryn entered the room where Phil was sleeping after she had taken substances and been drinking. She shot him 3 times with a handgun. Still high, she drove to her friend's house where she told him that she'd killed her husband. Now, he actually didn't believe her, and he asked her to come with him back to the house so that he could confirm this. They drove to the house, and when he obviously saw Phil's body, he knew she was telling the truth. After finding Phil's body, he rang police. By the time officers had got to the property, Bryn had locked herself in the bedroom. She then unalived herself with the same weapon that she used on her husband. After the passing of both of their parents, the pair's children were looked after by Bryn's sister Catherine and her husband.
This pedophile married her victim and eventually had children with him. This is the twisted story of Mary Kay Letourneau. So Mary Kay has a really interesting life story. Her father was a senator in California. Her brother was a counsel to George H.W. Bush. And yeah, her family was really politically plugged up, but Mary wanted to be a teacher. And eventually she started teaching at Shorewood Elementary. And it was at this elementary where she met 12-year-old Ville Fuilau. Keep in mind, at the time, Mary Kay was a 34-year-old teacher and Ville was only a 12-year-old. So at the time, keep in mind, Mary was married to a man named Steve. And before this affair with her student happened, she had fathered 4 children with her husband. So Mary was married with kids when she started this relationship with a 12-year-old. So after having Villy as a student in her class, Mary started this relationship that went from platonic to something more very quickly. And on June 18th, 1996, the police found her in a parking lot with Villy. As a police officer approached the car that they were in, Mary tried to hop into the front seat and Villy played dead and acted like he was asleep in the back. And even though the police checked them for identification, Villy lied and said that he was over 18 years old and that he was a family friend of Mary's. Mary said that she had gotten into an argument with her husband and they were just talking, nothing had happened in the car. The police then called Villy's parents and his mom said that he should just go back with his teacher. And still, the police thought nothing out of all this and they returned him back into her care so she could continue to assault him. But less than a year later, a relative of her husband's would contact the police and let them know that he had heard and seen some strange things going on with Mary Kay. She would be arrested, put on trial, and she was eventually convicted of 2 counts of child abuse. I can't say the word here, but yeah. So after her trial, she was sentenced to 6 months in jail. She was given 3 months suspended, so she really only had to serve 3 months, and she was then released. But just 2 weeks after she got out of jail for serving her time for the abuse of a minor, she was found in another car with Villy. And this time she had a passport, cash, all sorts of other documents, and it looked like she was going to flee the country with the minor. So before long she was back in court again, but this time she served over 7 years in prison. And it was while in prison while she gave birth to her second child with Villy. Yes, she had 2 children with the child that she was assaulting. In 2004, though, Mary Kay was released from prison. Villy actually petitioned to have the no contact order dropped, and the couple got married in 2005. And for the rest of their life, they led a allegedly happy life together. They had children together, and yeah, Mary Kay ended up dying in the year 2020. Now, I don't know how to feel about this entire story. It is just so strange. And I think that there definitely was a lot of brainwashing going on here. I mean, there's no way to excuse Mary Kay's behavior. She was 34 years old, initially assaulting a 12-year-old student of hers. But yeah, the 2 of them gave a number of interviews before Mary Kay passed away, and they said that they're really happy. He said that he totally forgave her for doing whatever she did to him, and that they're happy now. I don't know. I just don't know how to feel about this. It's such a weird story.
These are shocking and bone-chilling facts you won't believe, part 1. Up first, this is why you should always put your toilet seat down. When flushed, toilets expel small particles of water, urine, and feces, and, at times, dangerous pathogens that are invisible to the naked eye. Next up, in a study done by the University of Leicester, it was predicted that it would only take 100 days for zombies to take over the planet if a zombie outbreak ever happened. And what's even crazier, the university also predicted that after 100 days, only 300 humans would remain alive and uninfected. So what do you think? Are you going to be one of the 300 people left alive? Or are you just going to be a zombie after 100 days? Next up, this is Titanic survivor Catherine Gilnay, who was only 16 years old when the Titanic sank. But as the Titanic was sinking, she didn't realize the seriousness of the ship's situation until she reached New York. She thought that leaving in lifeboats and being picked up on another ship was all part of the journey. This is actually crazy, especially when everybody around you is screaming and drowning. So I have no idea how she didn't realize it was a real situation. And not only that, one of the most horrific events in human history.
Can you guess which theory was correct in this double murder with incredibly strange crime scenes? Brooke Baker was 19 years old, studying at a university in Indiana. She was incredibly intelligent and had dreams of becoming a journalist. Tragically, it was her murder and not her journalism that would make the front pages. On the 7th of September 1997, her brother went to her off-campus apartment. He found something that would haunt him forever. His sister was found deceased in her bed. She'd been brutally AR'd and stabbed. There was actually no sign of forced entry in the apartment. There was evidence, though, of a vicious struggle between Brooke and her murderer. Her brother also noticed something incredibly strange about the crime scene. The water was still running in the bath. Investigators immediately started coming up with theories as to what might have happened. Now, due to her journalism, Brooke had been looking into an alleged R at a nearby fraternity. Could she have upset the wrong person by doing this? Now, it was reported that Brooke had been threatened by a group of guys from that fraternity. Or could it have been to do with the landlord? Brooke told friends how uneasy she felt that her landlord would just let himself into her apartment. He would show up unannounced, and once in the middle of the night he shone a torch into her room. He also turned up when she was showering at one point. Now, he would have obviously had a way to get into the apartment without signs of forced entry. Then there was another theory circulating. Brooke had recently posted an advert for a roommate. Could someone have turned up under the pretense that they wanted to become her roommate? Now, please pause the video now and let me know whether you think one of those theories would be accurate or whether there was something else going on. Forensics teams started gathering evidence from the crime scene, but unfortunately there was no matches to the DNA they collected. Then on the 5th of July 1999, another shocking crime was discovered. Erica Norman was missing from the same university. Police searched her apartment and strangely found the same thing in the bathroom with the tap running. This time though, there was no body in the apartment. A man named Brian Jones was the last known person to be seen with Erica before she vanished. When he was questioned by police, they took a DNA sample from him. It was a match for the DNA that was found on Brooke. He was charged with Brooke's murder and then another breakthrough. 2 weeks later, Erica's body was found. Brian pleaded guilty to the girl's murders and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
These are murders everybody should know about, and this is a massive trigger warning. On January 19th, 1996, the mutilated remains of Diao Aquing, who disappeared 9 days prior, were found across multiple locations in China. Her body had been dismembered into over 2,000 pieces. The case remains unsolved, and it's one of the most notorious crimes in Chinese history. On January 10th, 1996 in the evening, Diao and her college roommate were punished for the illegal use of an electric appliance. After a conflict with the dormitory management, she left the building and did not return. Diao was last seen alive wearing a red coat with a black lining. She was reported missing, but her family was not notified by the authorities until January 19th. The discovery of Diao's remains in the winter of January 19th was first reported by a sanitary worker. Initially, he thought it was pork, so he brought it home for food. And while preparing the meat for himself, 3 human fingers were found in it. The worker then reported the discovery to the police, and they confirmed they were human fingers. Human remains in plastic-wrapped packages were eventually discovered across 8 locations around the university, including at a stadium, entrance gate, hospital, and along roadsides. The police later confirmed that the scattered remains were of Diao's and informed her father to visit Beijing. Between January 20th and 30th, Diao's head and clothes were found. More than 2,000 human remains were recovered. Diao's head and internal organs were boiled for several days. Crucial organs including the heart, liver, and spleen were never found. The forensics team was only able to identify the remains as belonging to a female through the analysis of body hair and muscle tissue. Relatives of Diao were able to identify her through a mole on her right cheek. A senior officer involved in the case described the killing as really cruel, which in my opinion is a nice way to put it. The officer also added that the pieces of flesh were dissected with high precision, only achieved by an individual with great understanding of anatomy. Police concluded that the murderer must have been a professional butcher or surgeon. Teachers and students then became the subject of investigation. 2 suspect profiles were brought up, including a single physical fit middle-aged male. However, the university department could not find any individuals that matched the characteristics of the profile. A major investigation was launched in the university and the areas around, but no major clues of the crime were found and the case failed to make any progress. In 2016, Nanjing police told the family of Diao that the case is still under investigation. Okay, so let's talk about this case for a second. If the killer was never found and he had the skill to dissect somebody into 2,000 pieces and never get caught with it, don't you think he might be a serial killer? And if he was, how many more people do you think he murdered after Diao? The dedication and skill, and honestly the obsession to cut somebody into 2,000 pieces and not get caught with it is crazy. This person could be walking around the streets of China today doing the same things to other people that he did to Diao. The thought of that is absolutely disturbing, and may Diao rest in peace.
Matt Lauer, the former host of The Today Show, is one of the most dangerous sexual predators in American history. A lot of you guys may have forgotten this story or don't know the details of this horrific story, but I'm going to remind you there are graphic details we're going to talk about, so viewer discretion is advised. So for decades, you couldn't turn on NBC News in the morning and not see this face, Matt Lauer. He was born in New York City in 1957, and years later he would work for the Today Show and become one of the biggest, most watched TV show hosts in the mornings. I certainly remember growing up watching NBC in the mornings, the Today Show, always seeing Matt Lauer. I mean, he was an integral part of morning news. And at one point, The Hollywood Reporter even named him the most powerful voice in news media. So obviously Matt Lauer had a lot of influence, a lot of famous friends, and a lot of power in the industry. So let's jump forward to 2017. At about the same time that all the charges were coming out about Harvey Weinstein being a sexual predator, suddenly Matt Lauer's name began to be published in the news. And no, it wasn't because he was reporting on the news himself, it was because he was a dangerous predator that was about to be exposed. So November 27th, 2017, Matt Lauer is randomly fired from the Today Show after working there for decades. And on that day, a message was sent to all NBC employees by the chairman, saying that they had terminated Matt because they had received a complaint about him about inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. And even though they said there was only one complaint, they said that they knew that there was something more. And at this point, this is when the true allegations began to come to light, and let me warn you again, some of these are really disturbing. So according to one employee that came out and told her story, Matt Lauer had been making inappropriate gestures and remarks about her since the late 1990s. And she said that in 2001, Matt Lauer had assaulted her. Apparently on that day, he had asked her to come to his office to discuss a story that he was working on. And then when she came in, he locked the door behind her, he asked her to take her shirt off, and then proceeded to assault her. Mid-assault, she passed out, and when she woke up, she was on the floor, and Matt Lauer was looking over her. He then asked one of his other workers to come help her out of his office and bring her to a nurse. Which once again shows that people working around this guy who was in a position of power, just helped him carry out all of these crimes and were never checked on it. And this brings us to the infamous button on the desk. So yes, this is a proven fact that Matt Lauer had a button located on and under his desk. And when he pressed that button, he could lock the door to his office, effectively sealing whoever he had invited inside of his office inside. And this button plays a part in all of these accusations. Apparently Matt Lauer would lock people in his office and subject them to all of these assaults, inappropriate comments, inappropriate conduct, and they had no way of escaping because of this hidden button. Now, eventually, lots of former employees and coworkers would come out and say that Matt Lauer had assaulted them, and this disturbing pattern of inappropriate behavior became public knowledge. All of his former coworkers, including people like Katie Couric, said that they completely cut him off. And after his firing, Matt Lauer didn't receive a single penny from NBC. Now, one of the sad things about all of this is that no charges were ever formally brought against Matt Lauer, so even though he had assaulted lots of different women, he was never really punished for it other than losing his job and losing his favor in the public eye. But according to friends, Matt Lauer is now reserved. He doesn't go out, he doesn't see anybody. All of his famous friends have stopped talking to him, so I'm assuming that his life is miserable.
Harrowing murder appeared on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. Then the police had a breakthrough no one was expecting involving another missing girl. It was June 1996 in Philadelphia. Amy Willard was a well-liked 22-year-old. She played football and lacrosse and was offered a scholarship by George Mason University. Tragically, her life would be cut short in a mystery that gripped the nation. Amy was home for the summer, and on the 19th of June she met up with some friends at Smokey Joe's Tavern. She actually left just before her friends did at around 1:30 a.m. Around half an hour later, her car was discovered abandoned by off-duty paramedics in Maple Township. This was strangely just a couple of miles from her home. The car was still on, with the door open and the radio playing. Who on earth would leave their car like this and just vanish? Then there was a terrifying sight. There was fresh blood on the pavement by the car. Police raced to the scene and forensics started gathering evidence. The blood appeared to indicate that somebody had been on the floor for a period of time. Investigators then discovered damage to the back bumper of the car and also a handprint. There were also tire tracks nearby. The following day, there was another worrying discovery. This time it was Amy's underwear and trainers. Now, it had been raining earlier on that morning, but tellingly the items weren't wet. This indicated that somebody had brought those items back to the scene. That day, police met a man called Andrew Kobach. Now, he was 23 and he had turned up to the scene to tell police he'd witnessed Amy's car that night. Now, police took his details but felt that he was quite suspicious. Shortly after this, another shocking discovery, but this time it was Amy's body. Horrifically, it was small children who were out playing who had discovered her naked body with a crushed skull. Now, police started looking into Andrew, who I just mentioned. He was local and he previously lived right by Smokey Joe's. They found handcuffs and a torch in his car, as well as police equipment. They discovered he'd previously been charged with impersonating police. He got a lawyer at this point and then stopped cooperating, but he still denied any involvement. Now, back to Amy's car, the evidence on the car suggested she may have been carjacked. This was due to that damage on the bumper. Her case remained frustratingly cold and appeared on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries until finally a breakthrough in 1997. It was the 29th of May and a 19-year-old girl rang police. Her name was Patty Jordan and she'd been a victim of a terrifying carjacking. She said she'd been followed after leaving a club. Now, luckily, she managed to get away and also get the number plate of the vehicle that tried to carjack her. It was identified as the car of Arthur Jerome Bomar Jr. He was actually a convicted murderer. He'd been given life in prison 20 years prior for the murder of Larry Carrier. Arthur had shot Larry dead after an argument over a car parking space. Shockingly, Arthur had been released from prison after just 11 years. In 1990, he was charged with attempted murder of Teresa Thompson after trying to sleep with her. Astonishingly, he was set free though after she passed away from a substance overdose. Now, after the second carjacking, police tried to track him down, but he was nowhere to be found. That was until a few days later. A woman rang police to say that a man was trying to break into her apartment, and when police arrived at the scene, it was Arthur. He was arrested, and what police found out next was horrifying. Arthur had on him some car keys, and nearby was a car. When they ran the vehicle through a search, they discovered that it was a stolen car. It belonged to missing 25-year-old Maria Cabuenos. She had vanished 3 months prior. Police also worryingly found dried blood in the vehicle. It ended up being confirmed as Maria's blood. Arthur was now a suspect in both murders. An R-kit was done on Amy's body, which proved that Arthur had R'd her body. Then on the 1st of January 1998, Maria's remains were found. Her cause of death was identical to Amy's. Now, during his trial for Amy's murder, his family members testified that he'd actually confessed to them to killing Amy. He was sentenced to death and had a horrific verbal response to Amy's family, which I'm not going to repeat on here. He remains on death row and his appeals have so far been denied. He remains a prime suspect in Maria's death, but he has never been charged.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This might be the worst true crime case in the United Kingdom's history. This case takes place in the United Kingdom on Christmas Day in 2010. Christy Bammy, who was a 15-year-old boy who lived with his parents in Paris, and on all accounts was just a regular young boy. Christy had a number of siblings, and one of those siblings was Magali Bamu. She was born in 1983 and was Christy's oldest sister. When Magali was 13, she was sent to live with her mother's niece and husband in England, East London. And it's reported she suffered a great deal at the hands of her carers. She was treated like a servant and forced to cook, clean, and take care of the carers' children, and was also not allowed to go to school. However, when she was old enough, she moved out and got away. She then found a job as a dental nurse before meeting a man named Eric. They met through a mutual friend and began a relationship. At first, she described Eric as very nice, but before long, Magali said he became very controlling, not allowing her to wear makeup, have friends, or leave the house alone. He would call her names and even make her eat off the floor with no plate. This then escalated and he soon began to beat her. But Eric had a very disturbing belief. He believed in something called the Kindoki, a type of demonic witchcraft. He believed in evil spirits and anyone that was possessed by evil spirits should be dealt with. Everyone that knew him stated he was obsessed with witchcraft and saying he was fighting an ongoing battle with witchcraft. Eric also said he had visions that scared him quite a lot. In December 2010, plans were made for Christy and his siblings to visit their big sister in London. He went with his older brother Yavez, his older sister Kelly, and his 2 younger siblings who can't be named for legal purposes. They arrived in London and made their way to Magali's home. Magali and Eric had just gotten engaged and everything was good, but shortly into the visit, things took an absolute horrific turn. Christy desperately needed a toilet, but however, the door to the bathroom was broken and he couldn't get the door open. This resulted in Christy peeing himself, and he was very embarrassed, so he decided to hide his pants until all the pee dried out. But the following day, Eric was looking for something around the house when he came across Christy's pants that were soaked with urine. A usual reaction would be to show sympathy to the young boy, but not for the witchcraft-obsessed Eric, who took this as a sign that Christy was possessed by some kind of demon and was attempting to possess the whole house with a spell. Eric became angry and started accusing the siblings of practicing witchcraft in his home. Eric and Magali forced the siblings to say prayers throughout the day and night and did this to remove the kindoki. They were denied food and sleep and were prevented from using the toilet. One of the siblings named Kelly later said, "I repeated again and again that we weren't witches and that we were only coming to spend Christmas together as a family. I don't know what was going through their minds. They believed we were there to kill them." For 4 days, the couple attacked the siblings, beating them with numerous blunt objects, and these included a metal bar, a hammer, and a chisel. They told the siblings they needed to do this to rid them of any demons. But the focus, however, was directed at Christy, as he was the one who wet his pants. Eric said to Christy, "Since you don't want to tell me the truth, I'm going to get the truth out of you with a stick." Eric grabbed Christy and stuck a metal bar in his mouth. He then used a hammer to hammer the metal bar into his mouth. Christy was also hit in the face with the hammer multiple times, causing a lot of damage to his facial bones. The siblings said that his face was disfigured and he was unrecognizable. A pair of pliers were also used. Eric clamped down on Christy's ears and wrenched the tool, completely shredding Christy's ears. The plier and hammer were also used to remove Christy's teeth. This went on for days, absolute brutal torture. Eric forced the siblings to hold down Christy as he smashed glass bottles and tiles over his head, causing very deep cuts to the back of his head and neck. Eric then called Christy's father and told him he was to come collect his demonic son, and if he didn't, he would kill him. Christy's father immediately looked for flights or trains to Paris, but it was the Christmas season and he struggled to find a way to get there. Christy called his father too, saying he feared Eric will kill him. But before his father could get there, it'll be too late. Kelly would later say, throughout the days of horrific attacks, Christy asked for forgiveness. He asked again and again, but his sister Magali did nothing to stop Eric from attacking him. In fact, she encouraged the violence and showed no care at all. She said they all deserved what they were getting. Their big sister, who was supposed to protect them, did the complete opposite. After days of brutal attacks, Christy begged to be killed. He couldn't handle the attacks he was receiving and became so weak, he couldn't even protect himself. Christy refused to admit he was a witch or practice any witchcraft, and the more Christy didn't admit to something he didn't do, the more angry Eric would get. Finally, on Christmas Day, Eric dragged Christy and the other siblings to the